Hey guys, to this week's Wealthwise Wednesdays Facebook Live. Of course, it's always going to be 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and if you're anywhere in between, you know where you are. So, in any case, tonight's subject we're going to talk about group investing, um, some considerations to be aware of, questions to ask, different structures, entity structures, and it's also some requirements, legal requirements and things like that. So in any case, welcome aboard. Appreciate you being a part of this. First things first is when you're doing group investing, a lot of people think of this always as a syndication. Well, it's not always a syndication, but oftentimes it is. Let's just talk about the world of syndication. Okay, first, within the world of syndication, there's three different levels of specificity. Okay, that's right, specificity. Yeah. Okay. First one is if it's you're fully specifying the properties that you're looking to invest in. In other words, this is the most regulated form of syndication. So you're going to identify specific properties, you're going to present them through like a private offering memorandum, and raise funds to buy these properties. And these are all specified before any funding takes place, before you raise any funds. Okay. And by the way, this is a great subject, whether you're brand new or you're a seasoned veteran, you're an agent or an investor, either one. You're going to, the more you know, you can never know too much, right? So the more you know, the better off you are. All right. Second form is like partially specified. You'll identify certain properties, but not all the properties. We actually call that semi-specified. Okay. And the third type is basically a blind pool. You're not actually specifying any properties. You're just simply, you're raising funds. You'll build up a pool of funds and you go out and buy the properties. And I've done this both first and third formats. The first format and the third format. Never done anything that was semi-specified. I've done fully specified and blind pool. Okay, so and I'm going to be reading from a notes, by the way. This was all part of the Massive Passive Cash Flow Method book, which is the sixth book I've read. This is in the last section of the last section of the book. Okay, it's typically more advanced. People generally don't do group investing until they've been in the game for a while, and they're looking to spread their risk, participate in larger and larger properties. So some of the things you need to be aware of are legal and security considerations. So if you're a broker, you can generally do these. Okay, if you've never done one before, I highly encourage you to get an attorney, somebody who's done syndications. Okay, it's definitely an advanced strategy. It's not for beginners, but beginners should learn about it because they may be party to one or be able to participate in one personally. Okay, you need to think about your legal entity, the structure of the group. We'll talk about that later, but do you need a CPA? I think the answer is yes. If you need a lawyer, I think the answer is generally yes. Again, the only exception will be if you're a broker, you've done a number of these. I've done a couple of them. I'm comfortable myself, but I would always still have an attorney on retainer that I would run these things by. Okay, I would basically create the structure, do all of the private offering memorandum work, identify the properties, all that type of stuff. But I always have an attorney review it in a minimum. Okay, that would be my suggestion there. An accountant, a CPA, you definitely want, because you're going to be affecting your taxes, your partner's taxes. The entity itself will have its own tax structure, usually that is. Also, again, there's IRS considerations when it comes to taxes. You get IRS considerations. Generally, in any kind of a partnership, the members of the partnership will get what's called a K1. Okay, every year you get a K1 that basically describes the income, expense, profit, and loss of the partnership that you're in, and you get a K1 specifying the results of the partnership, the income, expense, again, profit, and loss, in your portion of that. How does that get reported onto your personal tax return? So you have to take what's on the K1 and put it on your tax return. Okay. Also think about the duration of the relationship, the duration of the partnership. Is it long term? Is it short term? Part of that's going to be an exit strategy. You should always have an exit strategy in any investment you make, whether you're doing it yourself personally or within a group like this. You want to have an exit strategy. And what that'll lead to is the next subject, which is the relationship you have with other members of the party, other members of this group investing that you're in. Do you want to be in a long-term relationship with those folks? Well, hopefully the answer is yes, or you wouldn't be doing this, okay? But if it's a short-term thing, like you're doing a flip, maybe a year or less, that's different. But if you're buying a big multi-unit building, strip mall, storage facility, something like that, you really got to think through who you're doing business with, okay? Because it could be a long-term relationship. And I know when I partner with people, it's generally people I already know, people I've taught in class or training programs. Usually like in mastermind groups, we do partnerships within mastermind groups and things like that. And in fact, there's a couple of them starting up here. In any case, the legal entities, we'll talk about that in a second. One thing you want to be careful of is, or be knowledgeable about, is the term joint severability. So jointly and several liabilities. So what that means is joint and several liability. Like if you bought a house with your wife and you bought it prior to you being married, chances are in there when the deed was created and all that kind of stuff, title was provided, you bought the house with joint and several liability. What that means is you're jointly responsible for the property, but you're also responsible independently or severally, okay? So what that means is let's say you're intending to marry this person, you buy a house together, you end up not getting married, and that person bails out on you and they don't even pay their part of the mortgage. Well, that means you're responsible not just for your portion of that, you're responsible for the whole thing, okay, jointly and severally. That's what that means. The reason I bring this up is in the case of partnerships, you need to think through the liability when it comes to the entity that you're forming, this legal entity, okay? So with that in mind, title to whatever property you're buying or properties you're buying will be in the name of the LLC. For example, I'm assuming you're forming an LLC in most cases. Even if it's a partnership, you form an LLC that's set up like a partnership, right? Again, in a partnership, you each get a K1. We mentioned that just a moment ago. Right now, you also have general partnerships and limited partnerships. Let's just talk about limited partnerships for a second. Any limited partnership, what that means is the individual investors in the partnership, generally speaking, are considered limited investors. They have limited liability. In other words, their liability is limited to the level of their investment. So if you have a partnership, limited liability partnership, and there's 10 people that have invested $100,000 apiece, and you're one of those 10 people, you invested $100,000, the limit of your liability, if something should happen to that business entity and it gets sued, you're only liable up to $100,000, okay? Now the reality is that means your $100,000 is also at risk. You can make money on it, or you could lose the whole $100,000 or lose a portion of it, but that's the limit of your risk. Generally, you'll have a general partner that really doesn't own anything. Maybe they have one share. You give them one share in the partnership, but that general partner assumes the overall liability for the partnership, okay? General partner generally does all the management duties. They're basically bringing sweat equity to the entity. And the limited partners are simply bringing money. That's all they're doing. Limited partners are simply bringing money to the table. General partner does all the heavy lifting. They do all the legwork, okay? Now, if you think about this, LLCs have not been around for a long, long time. They came out, they essentially became very popular in the 90s. They actually came out before that. But as far as a body of law, having a lot of case history, that really wasn't developed till really the 1990s. Okay, and you think about an LLC, limited liability is available to all the members of the entity. The LLC, the income is also typically called pass-through income. So what that means is if I own an LLC, Gary Wilson LLC, and that LLC owns individual properties, and they generate income. Rents exceed expenses, I make money on the properties, or the LLC does, excuse me. The LLC, the income on the LLC passes through to me personally on my personal tax return. So in other words, at the federal level, my tax return is essentially going to be a 1040, and on there, I'll identify the income that came through or passed through the LLC that I then pay taxes on. The LLC essentially doesn't pay any taxes, okay? It's just a pass-through entity. Um, you can have, you can also have multiple classes in the LLC. There's no restrictions as to the members of the LLC. It's just a very user-friendly structure, and you can make the LLC look like, for tax reporting purposes, you only have to elect this too, by the way. You can make it look like a sole proprietorship for tax purposes. You can make it look like a corporation, C Corp, for tax purposes. You can make it look like an S Corp for tax purposes. And of course, you can make it look like a partnership for tax purposes, which is why we like it. So in any case, there at the state, that's the federal level. At the state level, and every state's different, guys. You just have to look at your own state. At the state level, typically, you do have to file a return for your individual LLCs. Even though the income is passed through to you, you still have to identify and report the LLC. But again, law is different state by state. When it comes to corporations, you can still set up a C Corp. You don't have to do an LLC and make it look like a C Corp. You can actually set up an actual C Corp, okay? The thing is there's pros and cons, of course, to everything. Setting up a C Corp has a lot of pros and a lot of cons. Some of the pros are you can determine what your fiscal year is. You can say, well, my fiscal year is, July 1st to June 30th, okay? And then you don't have to pay taxes on that until midway through the year, right? And once your anniversary date's up. There also is a lot of other benefits, like the type of tax shelters you can set up with a C Corp. You can create your own 401k. You can have your own, medical savings plan. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do. Now, if you're an owner or an executive in the C Corp, which you probably are, you benefit to the same ratio that all your employees benefit. So I say that because their benefit may be a lower dollar amount than your benefit, okay? But on a ratio basis, you have the same ratio as them, but on a dollar for dollar basis, man, you're making a whole lot more money. Let's face it, let's say your C Corp has a 401k to set up to allow you to kick in up to 12% of your earnings, and the company will match you 50 cents on the dollar, which means another 6%. Well, if your average employee is making $50,000 a year, that could be a potential benefit of $3,000. 6% of $50,000, $3,000. But if you're an executive or making $500,000, 6% of that is $30,000. Okay, it's a big difference. So a lot of corporations, the reason why they like great benefits packages is the owners, the executives themselves benefit too. Some of the cons are when a corporation distributes dividends. Okay, well, first off, the corporation's paying taxes on its own earnings, so it pays taxes on its earnings, and then the dividends, whatever is left, they send out in the form of dividends to the shareholders. Well, the shareholders receive the dividends, and they themselves got to pay taxes on the dividends. So it's like the money gets taxed twice. I know there's different things you can do to mitigate that, but the reality is that's a real, honest to goodness con for having a corporation. But the reason why a lot of corporations use C Corps are because of they feel like the benefits outweigh the pros outweigh the cons. Okay. In any case, another potential entity is a REIT, R-E-I-T. When it comes to real estate, you can set up a real estate investment trust, R-E-I-T. And for example, we did one years ago where we helped an elderly gentleman create a REIT. He raised funds by selling shares of the REIT. The REIT bought his portfolio of properties. He was the principal of the REIT, so he got a management fee there. And his own property management company still managed the underlying assets. So he still got income from that. And yet he was able to cash out or basically capitalize on all his investments. So he capitalized and he still got fee income, right? Pretty good situation. So a REIT is like a mutual fund, basically, if you think about that. So in any case, as with anything in life, at some point, the government's going to get involved, right? So there is a there's syndication rules, right? So security regulations are basically security regulations, and that's why I say if you've never done this before, and you're not an attorney, you should probably get an attorney. Okay, I would just really wouldn't. I wouldn't partake in this by myself. Initially, I would have an attorney who's done syndications before, work with you and help you establish the right framework, the structure, everything, all the paperwork, all the contracts. So, in any case, a couple things when it comes to some of the characteristics of security are there's an investment of money, there's a common enterprise, there's an expectation of profit, obviously, and you can also be solely from the efforts of a third-party promoter. So you can have somebody do the promoting for you, which is generally what you would do in a syndication anyways. When it comes to family and friends, I generally don't do business with family and friends, guys. I just don't do it. Years ago, I did a lot of banking with my parents. Worked well. There was no problem with it. As a matter of fact, we did it for about 15 years. But the thing is, when it was all said and done, I realized, I thought, my gosh, if something had happened to them or something happened to me, that could be a real pickle when it comes to the other siblings, the other heirs, you know. So that's why I just really, quite frankly, I just wouldn't do it with family and friends. If you want to do it, I did it. It's, you know, go, feel free. But make sure your exit strategies include contingencies for people getting married, people getting divorced, people being born, people dying, people getting jobs, people losing jobs, and all kinds of stuff happens in life. And whenever those things happen, now all of a sudden human nature, the business of human nature kicks in, human relations. And my suggestion is whatever you do, you should have all your extra strategies identified ahead of time, not just what happens when you make money. We all happy because we make money. But what happens when life happens? What happens to entities? You want to be careful of that. You also want to, by the way, the purpose of security regulations are obviously regulate the security. You also want to regulate the promoter. You need to be factual in your promotional efforts. And you know, at the end of the day, it just comes down to making sure you consult with your broker or attorney, unless you're a broker yourself or an attorney yourself. But in any case, guys, we're kind of running a little bit longer. I just wanted to go over that basic subject tonight. We do have a question. Maximo, are your investments in a syndication liquid? Well, there's two levels of this, Maximo. So your shares, let's say you own shares in a syndication. There should be some operating agreement documentation that says what happens if you want to sell out. What happens to your shares? What are the other owners? What are their rights? What are your rights? So in the case of in the question of being liquid, it all depends on your operating agreement and what rights and what roles and rights, responsibilities do each of you have. The entity itself has to be spoken for. The entity doesn't have a voice. You, the owners, are the voice of the LLC in this case, okay? But let's say you want to sell shares. Somewhere in your operating agreement, it says what happens when you want to sell shares, okay? And so the answer is it can be liquid depending on your operating agreement. Now, the underlying asset, if it's real estate, it may make your underlying, the overall investment somewhat illiquid, because you can't just pick up a phone and sell a piece of real estate like you can sell a stock or a bond and by the end of the day. However, you know, there may be enough capital in the LLC or enough equity in the underlying asset, i.e. a property, that you can, maybe the LLC can borrow against that and then pay off the investor who wants out. And now maybe you got 4 investors instead of 5, for example. So liquidity is a variable. Maximo, appreciate the question, but it depends on the structure of the entity and your basically your operating agreement, rules and regulations. So in any case, guys, good subject tonight. I appreciate you participating. If you got any questions, obviously just give me a buzz, let me know. This is Wednesday, February 20th. For those of you who haven't done so yet, please go ahead and sign up for the next 3-day event. It's April 5th, 6th, and 7th at the Anaheim Marriott, right outside of Disneyland, man. You know, brand new, just remodeled. Bring your family. If you're a current active student, you get to go for free. You don't have to pay for the event, which is pretty awesome. We do encourage you to go no matter where you're coming from, all right? If you've never been one before, it's a matter of fact, Jeff Johnson's on. Jeff was at the one in Chicago. I mean, Jeff, would you say that it was a pretty cool event? In fact, we've had people come to the event over and over again because, repetition is the mother of learning. You get to network with people from all over the U.S. and Canada. We're also inviting 500 chiropractors and 500 dentists to the event. They're not all going to show up, but maybe 10% show up. You get to network with them too, and maybe find yourself a partner or a client. And again, it's good stuff here. So you guys take care of yourselves. We will see you next week. If you have a particular subject you want to cover, just please let me know in advance, and I'll be glad to do that. Okay, you guys take care. Oh, by the way, one more thing. The podcast has officially been launched. It's called Real Estate Investing for Professional Men and Women. It's on 75 different channels. You can find it on, iTunes, iHeartRadio. There's bunches of them out there. Subscribe to that podcast. All right, guys, we will see you next week. Take care and God bless. Bye-bye.